Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach and for the light novel Can't Fear Your Own World in the video to follow. What happened to the Zero Division after the 1000-Year Blood War arc? Despite this group of former captains being declared stronger than the entire Gotei 13 put together, things looked pretty bleak for the 5 of them following the Vandenreich's conquest of the royal palace, during which Yhwach and his strongest followers, the Schutzstaffel, invade and successfully overthrow the Soul King himself, with Adnias eventually cut down and absorbed by his son in a moment that marked a pivotal turning point in the war and a colossal failure for the Shinigami. While Ichibei tried to prevent Yhwach himself from making it to the Soul King, the rest of the Zero Division were tasked with dealing with the Quincy King's children. In the manga, the Schutzstaffel defeat the remaining Zero Division members off-screen, while Yhwach kills Ichibei, using the Almighty to overcome his bankai. The anime changes things up a little bit, but ultimately the Zero Division are still killed, and Yhwach is still victorious, eventually becoming the new Soul King. And yet, by the end of the series, 10 years after the war in fact, everything appears to have returned to normal, despite the deaths of the Soul King, Yhwach, and the Zero Division. So, what became of the 5 of them in the immediate aftermath of the Quincy Blood War? Do they survive, and if so, how? What is the secret to their apparent immortality? Is there any room for them in the future of the Bleach story? Let's find out. Before we get started on today's video, do consider hitting subscribe down below. If we want to reach 300,000 subs by the end of the year, it's only going to be possible with your help, so if you haven't done yet, do consider hitting that button. It's so quick and easy to do, totally free as well, and it is helping out the channel enormously. And also, if you want to take your support for the channel that extra step further, check out the Patreon as well. Just like everyone who is on screen right now is doing, again, it's making a massive difference, and it's greatly appreciated. So before we dive into the aftermath of the Quincy Blood War, first a brief recap of where we left each member of the Zero Division, because they're all in an interesting place, so to speak. Ichibei's fate is definitely the strangest and the least clear-cut. After he's killed by Yhwach, Ichigo is able to revive him by calling out the monk's full name, thus allowing Ichibei to siphon a piece of Ichigo's strength to rebuild his body even from beyond the grave. Now obviously this is pretty crazy, considering Yhwach blew Ichibei's body to pieces with his head literally falling at Yhwach's feet. And it feels like Kubo gave Ichibei such a graphic and violent death to really hammer home the fact that it doesn't matter how quote-unquote dead Ichibei actually is, he can always come back to life, and we'll discuss the true nature behind such a power later. And of course the ability to resurrect himself in this way is really unlike anything we've ever seen before, and in that way is totally fitting for the godlike leader of the Zero Division. But once Ichibei's body is restored, he asks Ichigo to do everything he can to stop Yhwach from killing the Soul King, revealing that while he has been revived, it will take too long for his strength to return for him to be of any use. Of course, Ichigo and the others oblige and head off to the throne room, and yet the very last time we ever see Ichibei in the manga, the leader of the Zero Division leaves us with a sinister proclamation, as he apologizes to Ichigo and his friends, musing that they can't defeat Yhwach no matter what, before noting, as if speaking to Yhwach himself, that that's what peace is really all about. And Ichibei looks downright creepy as hell here too. Now, I always wondered what was really going on here, what Kubo was trying to say, what Ichibei really meant, and I've always kind of assumed that Ichibei was referring to the changing of who controls the world as being something inexorable. For Yhwach, he initially wasn't able to overthrow the status quo of the world either for 1,000 years, and that's what peace is. Simply staying put and dealing with something even if you don't like it and you can't do anything about it. Whether true or not, that is certainly one definition of peace, a kind of peace, and that seems to be the peace that Ichibei himself has overseen and ensured for so many years, and now it's Yhwach's turn, that no matter what Ichigo and the others will try and do about it, this is going to happen, and it's essentially a sort of changing of the guard, at least as far as Ichibei sees it. almost as inevitable as the changing of the seasons. Either way, this is the last time we ever see Ichibei in the manga, which is strange to me because a lot of pretty earth-shattering events take place very soon after. Ichibei is around and about somewhere when Adnias is both cut down and later absorbed, and it's strange that while he might be technically useless at the moment, that we don't even get a reaction from him. I mean, this is his life's work being undone. It's going to have enormous ramifications for essentially the entire universe, but again, going back to his final scene at the start of chapter 613, it seems likely, it feels like he's accepted the change in ruler as being inevitable at this point. But then he's also missing in action during the complete overhaul, the transformation of the royal palace into Varvelt, and he presumably ended up somewhere within the new Quincy fortress. It's weird to think that he should be there, in the royal palace, in the middle of all of this, while all this fighting is going down, yet he never meets up with the Gotei 13, never seeks out Ichigo or anyone. Is his power really that weak? Is it really taking that long to return? I guess it could be a case of when he's killed, completely killed, it does take his power maybe a few days to be fully restored to normal. But on the other hand, considering he was designated a special war power not for his strength, not for his broken abilities, but for his wisdom, something that doesn't necessarily need a combat situation to find value out of, it's surprising that he didn't try and seek anyone out. The Gotei 13 could have perhaps used some of that wisdom. As for the rest of the Zero Division, well, their fates are much less interesting. In the manga, Oetsu is blasted through the chest by the true power of the X-axis, while Tenjiro, Hikifune, and Senjumaru are all killed off-screen. The next time we see them, in chapter 611, is after Ichibei's defeat, but prior to his resurrection, where we see their corpses lying defeated at the end of the battle. Of course, the anime changes their fates somewhat substantially, and in doing so, maybe even makes the revelation of what becomes of them following the war make even more sense. Rather than simply having the Schutzstaffel kill them off-screen as in the manga, the anime lets the Zero Division members control their own fates in a very interesting way. Realizing they can't win without bankai, Oetsu, Hikifune, and Tenjiro all kill themselves as part of a ritual to release the Blood Oath seal on Senjumaru, allowing the Great Weaver to unleash her bankai, Shatatsu Karagara Shigarami no Suji, which she then uses to capture and imprison every single member of the Schutzstaffel in one fell swoop. Of course, once Yhwach the Almighty activates, Uryu's own power is bolstered, allowing him to free himself, and after a short duel with Senjumaru, Uryu ultimately kills her by trapping her in her own bankai with the antithesis and then sniping her through the chest, ending the fight. And then in regards to Ichibei, while his fate remains the same between the manga and the anime explicitly shows us how he restores his destroyed body, simply forging it out of black itself, which actually makes me wonder what Ichibei is really made of, despite the fact that he's clearly, full of, well, blood and guts when his body is blown to pieces. Either way, with the majority of the Zero Division seemingly dead, while Ichibei disappears from the story entirely after his resurrection, the most powerful group of Shinigami find themselves in an unfortunate and precarious situation. However, once the war is over, and we skip ahead 10 years, we discover that the world is absolutely fine, having been pulled back from the brink. Ergo, there must be a new Soul King to have replaced Yhwach, and thus there must still be a Zero Division, right? Their job is technically not done. Or at the very least, it has started over again. Is it now only comprised of Ichibei, or did he promote some new captains in that interval? Well, Can't For Your Own World gives us the answer, as is normally the case, and it's actually quite interesting. Allow me to read a short passage from the prologue of the first book, that crucial section of the novel that deals with the immediate aftermath of the war, which, as I've said many times, would be invaluable to have in the anime. And it reads as follows. Kyoraku noticed that the high priest who had been standing next to him was heading out of the greater palace. "Where are you going, your eminence?" just going to give Squad Zero a wake-up call. Squad Zero, the 5 members including the High Priest, were said to be as powerful as the entire 13 Court Guard companies put together. They were the elite Special Royal Guard. Each member of Squad Zero was a pioneer who had developed something fundamental to Soul Reaper operations, such as Zanpakuto or Shihakusho. They were paragons who had fittingly nurtured Soul Reaper history from its starting point of 0. But Kyoraku had heard that Yhwach and his subordinates had killed all of Squad Zero minus the High Priest, before he made his way to the palace, and so the phrase wake-up call left him puzzled. The High Priest immediately offered an answer to his confusion. We didn't convert our bones to Oken for the fun of it. Our spiritual powers have more or less fused with the spiritual pulse flowing from our Zero Riden. As long as one of us survives, the others will revive enough to at least walk when they are called for. So you would have been in quite a dire situation if Ichigo hadn't won, Your Eminence. Yhwach had at one point remade the Ryokyu into the Varvelt, the castle of the true world. Had Yhwach now been alive and well, even the vestiges of the Ryokyu would have vanished, and the entire Squad Zero, minus the High Priest, would have perished. Squad Zero won't die so easily, I won't allow it. That's their fate, and I need Oetsu and the others to get back to work. So like I said, it's very interesting stuff. Let's take Ichibei's line regarding the Oken first of all. He notes that they didn't convert their bones to the Oken for the fun of it, which makes sense, but in chapter 519, when that secret is revealed, Ichibei notes that their bones are transformed by the Soul King when they are chosen for the position of Squad Zero member. Back then, it seemed as though the only reason was to allow them to freely move between the palace and the rest of the Soul Society in a way no one else could, as of course the Oken acts as the key. But here in the novel, Ichibei offers an additional reason for why their bones were transformed in this manner, and it's one that I think is even more interesting, as it's even more integral to their makeup as beings in this world. It essentially ties them to the royal palace in a near literal sense. Not only does their bones being the Oken mean they can enter the palace whenever they want, but it means they are the palace. They are extensions of the Soul King, just as the palace itself is as well. Ichibei notes that their spiritual powers are bound to the flow of power from their individual Zero Riden, meaning those 5 cities are more than just arbitrary spaces for them to govern. The cities themselves represent the 5 Squad Zero members in a very literal way, almost like their own hearts. They represent their lives and their existence. And therefore Ichibei notes that as long as one of them lives, the others can all be revived with but a word. Now what's really interesting about this, though, is that Ichibei's own revival is something totally separate, it seems. Because of course by the time Ichibei is killed, the other 4 members are also already dead, and in this circumstance that would surely mean the Zero Division is completely finished. But it seems like Ichibei is essentially immortal, on a separate plane from how even the rest of Squad Zero are essentially immortal. They are immortal, but only so far as they need both one member to be alive and or the palace to be intact, or else they will die for good. And again, this is likely due to the almost symbiotic nature the Soul King has with both the palace and his extensions in the form of the Zero Division, hence their unique divine powers. But Ichibei's powers, divine as they are, seem to be different. His power lies in names, just as all things do. And we've seen before this name is special and can only be said by those who are worthy because great power resides within it. I do have a couple of questions though about this. If Ichibei had been killed after Yhwach had taken out the Soul King, would he still be able to access this power of resurrection through his name? Or would he now just be completely dead? And how does that actually work in regards to the cycle of rebirth? Does Ichibei's soul kind of just hang around in limbo waiting for someone to speak his name? And then if the Soul King is extinguished while that's happening, is Ichibei's soul just snuffed out as well? And does the person who revives Ichibei have to be as strong as Ichigo for it to work at all? Going back to the other members, as I've said, they need the palace to be intact in order for them to cling on, essentially, as noted in the novel. And again, presumably their souls are hanging around in the ether, or within the palace itself, within the makeup of the palace, waiting to be revived. But as the narrator notes in this passage, had Yhwach Arc won the war, the remaining vestiges of the palace would have been lost, and Squad Zero would have died for good alongside it. Now again, what does this really mean? Because on the surface, I would say the palace falls completely and is totally remade into Varvelt during Yhwach Arc's ascension, so I'm not sure how that doesn't count as the palace disappearing. What does it mean really by the last vestiges of Ryokyu? I mean, the 5 cities are still technically there, I suppose, albeit now Quincy in nature, so I guess that might be what it means? And when it says the last vestiges would have disappeared, does that mean Yhwach Arc was planning on reshaping Varvelt even further, to the point where the cities would be completely lost? I don't know, but I do like that Ichibei notes that Squad Zero won't die so easily, as he won't allow it. That's really cool, and again shows that since he can't really die at all, since he doesn't follow the same rules as they do, at least not to the same degree, he really does govern their lives in a sense, even though his survival too is tied to the palace. The only reason Ichibei lives is because he has another means of being resurrected, one that seems to be separate from the palace, and this happens before the palace falls. I also want to go back to that idea that I mentioned earlier about how the fates of the Zero Division as it happens in the anime seemingly ties back into this notion revealed in Can't Fear Your Own World in a slightly better and more concrete way, a way that makes more sense. Them choosing to kill themselves as a part of the Blood Oath Seal ritual seemingly ties their fates more directly into the rules and the laws of the royal palace. And so you can kind of envision a future where it is possible to bring them back to life because of the manner they died, because they chose to kill themselves as a part of this ritual which is baked into the royal palace. That is why in the future it is possible to revive them. However, that does bring up a question regarding Senjumaru, who wasn't killed in this manner and was in fact killed straight up by a member of the Schutzstaffel, Uryu, shot through the heart by a Quincy's arrow. And then of course there's the question of what actually happens to a Shinigami's soul when it is destroyed by a Quincy arrow. It was noted by Kubo, I believe, in Club Outside at one point that clearly, when a Quincy kills a Shinigami, it is not exactly the same as when they kill a Hollow, as Yamamoto's soul, despite his Konpaku being completely obliterated by Yhwach Arc's arrows, ended up in hell, so it must be able to find its way into the cycle of rebirth at some point. Presumably Senjumaru is going to come back to life in the future, so presumably Uryu taking her out didn't affect her prospects in death. So, armed with this knowledge, what does the future hold for the Zero Division? Alongside Ichibei, Oetsu makes a reappearance in Can't Fear Your Own World as well, but truth be told, it's hard to see where these guys might fit in, if, say, the Hell Arc ever does actually happen. And that's a shame because I would love to see more from them, but truthfully the only reason they showed up at all in the 1000-Year Blood War arc is because the war revolved heavily around the royal palace. Based on what we know of their customs, no matter how serious the conflict with Hell gets, unless it infringes upon the current Soul King, it doesn't seem likely that they would get involved. That being said, there's always room for things to be different. Kubo can always find a loophole, or even write in some development for the way these guys work. Maybe after being saved by Ichigo in a pretty big way, the Zero Division decides, actually, maybe we can help out a little more when it seems necessary, and as a result we see them getting involved in whatever is happening down below. It's also possible that whatever conflict is taking place does involve the Soul King again, but to be honest, I kind of doubt it. I think that story has to have run its course now for the most part. The Soul King was Aizen's ambition, and then Yhwach Arc's, and within the 1000-Year Blood War arc we kind of found out almost everything we really need to know regarding the Royal Palace, regarding the Zero Division and Adnias. If there is another ultimate enemy waiting in the wings in a potential Hell arc, I don't think they should really be focusing on killing the Soul King again, but maybe they will be. Also, considering Hell is apparently ancient, and not even a part of the 3 worlds created by Adnias, maybe that itself is grounds for the Zero Division getting involved anyway. To be totally honest, considering how their immortality works, it is a little odd that they don't get involved in conflicts down below. Again, I know that's kind of beneath them. Again, I know it's not really their jurisdiction. But for example, if they had just turned up in the fake Karakura town to fight Aizen, even if the four of them arrived and left Ichibei behind so that someone was guarding the palace, would Aizen have really stood a chance? Especially since he can't really kill them without bringing down the palace too. They won't stay dead. And also, as far as we know, Aizen never sought to reshape the palace in such a literal way, in the same way Yhwach did. To be honest, I don't think it would even be possible for a Shinigami to do it on that scale. So does that mean the Zero Division would have simply never died in a battle against Aizen? Not truly, not permanently anyway. In that sense, they're even more broken than first thought. So yeah, I would absolutely love to see them again. I'd be totally open to it, and let's face it, there's a lot we still need to know. And considering we know they survive, we know they're alive, and presumably just back watching over the Royal Palace again, I guess it's possible. I have to imagine they were humbled somewhat after being defeated and killed by Yhwach and then ultimately saved by a human, in the exact same way the Gotei 13 were with the Aizen conflict and the first Quincy invasion previously, something that the Zero Division chastised the Gotei 13 for. The Royal Palace, the Zero Division, could even undergo similar development to the Gotei 13 in that way. Alright everyone, but that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, but took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about what happens to the Zero Division in the aftermath of the 1000-year Blood War arc. Would you like to see these guys again? How do you feel about their seeming immortality, about how their survival is apparently tied to the palace itself? I'd love to get all of your thoughts and feelings down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Is there any room for these guys to return in a potential Hell arc in the future? If so, what kind of capacity would you like to see them do so in? Let me know your theories down in the comments below. Alright guys, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Remember to hit subscribe to help us reach 300,000 subs. Support the channel over on Patreon. That's a great way to support the channel, to help keep the lights on. It really does mean absolutely everything. It's greatly appreciated as well. And until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.